Moving further afield now, Ukraine's southern port of Odesa has been hit by Russian missiles overnight, destroying several grain stores. Warehouses and a private house were damaged and caught fire as a result of falling debris. No deaths have been reported from the attack. The attack is the latest in a series of missile and drone strikes, which Kiev says are intended to prevent Ukraine from shipping its agricultural products to the world. For the latest on the story, I'm now joined by journalist Adil Bradlow. Adil, appreciate your time this afternoon. Can you provide an overview of the recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, particularly regarding the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the region that we've just seen recently?
Okay, well, let's start with the drones. See, we are on that. Basically, people are saying that the attacks yesterday on Odesa, last night on Odesa, were in retaliation for drone attacks by the Ukrainians on the Russians in the Russian Black Sea Fleet, where the commander, Admiral Viktor Solokov, was killed, along with around about 30 officers, I believe. So there was quite a devastating strike, cruise missile strike on the Russian High Command in the Black Sea Fleet yesterday. And this is basically part of the campaign to isolate Crimea. So basically, most of the fighting from a Ukrainian point of view, the offensive activity is in the Zaporizhia region. And what the Ukrainians are trying to do there is to push through to the Sea of Azov. So they've got basically, at the moment, they've taken Robotne, and they're moving towards Verbove, which is the next town on the way to Tokmak, which is the sort of target of their current offensive. But they are having to fight through very heavy Russian defenses. The Russians have spent the summer digging in. They have 3 lines of defense with all sorts of tank traps, mines, all sorts of booby traps. So the going is very slow. It's a hard slog for the Ukrainians, and they are pushing slowly forward, with the possibility that the gains that they've made in the last couple of weeks could be the beginnings of a breakout and getting behind the Russian lines. But that's only part of the story, because the rest of there's fighting in 2 other basic areas around Bakhmut, which has been going on for over a year now. The Ukrainians are advancing around Bakhmut, trying to seal off Russian paratroopers that have been sent there. And then in the north, the Russians are launching attacks in the Lyman area, in the Kharkiv area. So it's a very active battlefield at the moment as the summer winds down and the weather soon will turn. And there'll be a pause during the rainy season in the autumn. But I think once the ground firms up in the winter, we'll see things moving again. I remember it was last year in November when Kherson fell to the Ukrainians. So, while the going has been slow and the advances have not been great at the moment, I expect that once the winter comes and the ground hardens up again, we'll see some significant developments.
Well, you speak of Russian casualties. Do we expect the Russians to retaliate immediately? What is their likely plan of action?
Well, in terms of retaliation for the killing of Admiral Sokolov, that's already been factored in. I think some of the stuff that we saw, some of the attacks we saw last night on Odesa on the grain stores, and the redirecting of drone strikes to the electrical infrastructure again, as we head towards winter. I mean, keeping the lights on and keeping the heating going is crucial for Ukraine. So, I expect the Russians to pick that up as each try. I mean, essentially what we're talking about here is a war of attrition, and it's just breaks first, and it's really hard to tell at the moment. I mean, lots of reports of low Russian morale. Obviously, we hear lots of reports of high Ukrainian morale, but in the end, you never really know. So it'll be interesting to see how things pan out.
Now, the recapture of the city of Tokmak is highlighted as a potential major breakthrough for the counteroffensive. What strategic advantages would come through with the retaking of Tokmak, and how significant is it in the broader context of the conflict?
Okay, so Tokmak is basically the road to Melitopol, and from Melitopol down to the Sea of Azov. And if the Ukrainians are able to capture those 2 cities and threaten they basically threaten to split the Russian army in 2. So if they can push all the way down to the Sea of Azov, troops inside Crimea are completely cut off, especially if they manage to cut the bridge that runs from Russia on the other side into Crimea. So if the Ukrainians are able to isolate and break up the Russian formations into two essential elements, there's a real chance they can get in behind them and reap serious damage. Places like Rostov-on-Don, which is the high command on the Russian side of the Sea of Azov, that comes under threat. And so the whole game is open, but it's making that break into Tokmak, which is the real hard part at the moment.
Now, we've had some insight into the type of fighting taking place in the south, involving small assault squads. Could you discuss the strategic advantages and challenges associated with this approach?
Okay, so basically what you're dealing with is you're dealing with a well-dug-in enemy. So you need to basically be able to send in armor and troops in support to clear the way. So you have sappers, engineers basically moving in, clearing a path through the minefields. And we're talking about minefields that are 10 kilometers thick in some places. We're talking about troops that have spent over a year digging in fortified positions. And these are fortified with concrete, fortified with wood, sandbags, the whole thing. I mean, and they're overlapping arcs of fire. So it's a really difficult job to get through these kinds of defenses. But the Ukrainians have been making slow but steady progress. As I said to you, Robotny fell a couple of weeks ago. Verbovie is now the next town on the road to Tokmak. So sooner or later they're gonna achieve a breakthrough. It's just a question of time and whether they have the manpower and the weaponry and ammunition to do it.
Now, let's talk about support for Ukraine, certainly from the West. Where does it stand at the moment, and what are the implications of continued support or lack thereof in this fight against the Russians?
Okay, so there's been a falling out in the last couple of weeks between the Poles and the Ukrainians. The Polish have been very strong supporters of the Ukrainian effort. There's been a fallout between the Poles and the Ukrainians over grain. Basically, with the closing of the Russian deal with the grain exports from Ukraine through the Black Sea, with that being cut off, grain is coming through Poland, coming through Romania, through various EU countries to be supposedly sold on, but it's finding its way onto the local markets, and this is upsetting local Polish farmers. And the Poles are going to the Poles are going to the polls very soon. So there's a lot of politicking going on. I mean, I don't think really the support is going to wane, but the longer this war drags on, the more and more difficult it's going to be. Like, for example, if you look at what's happening in America with the budget vote that's going to bring if that doesn't happen within the next 5 or 6 days, the American government's going to come to a standstill. And one of the things that's holding up that vote is assistance to Ukraine, financial and military assistance to Ukraine. There are elements within the Republican caucus that are not, shall we say, pro-Ukraine. Donald Trump, well, we know his views on the whole war thing. So it's a difficult situation. I mean, Zelensky has been out and about. He was at the UN General Assembly last week. He even saw the Sudanese president, General Abdel Fattah, and that's quite interesting because there are stories I've seen on various networks of Ukrainian special operatives in, for example, Sudan, taking out elements of the RSF. And that are being supported by Wagner troops. So there's a lot of stuff going on. It's a complicated world we live in these days.
So, Adil, I want to touch a little bit on the Africa involvement, in particular President Cyril Ramaphosa, who spoke in New York recently. And one of the things he said is, as we engaged with parties in this conflict as African leaders, one of the issues we raised was that there should be confidence-building measures that could create a sense of confidence towards the resolution of this conflict. In this regard, we said issues such as the children who were removed from Ukraine should be returned. And he spoke about the success of this initiative, or certainly the success of some of that engagement by the African leaders headed by himself with both Russia and Ukraine. How much you read into that? What's your take on it?
So I think what the South African president is doing is important. He comes to the conflict as a non-combatant. how neutral is debatable because the ANC still has very strong ties with the with Russia. So there's those kind of political concerns that run through the party, at least at any rate. But he comes to this thing from a neutral position, and he's looking for a way to end it. And it's a problem for everybody, this war. I mean, it needs to be brought to an end. But the problem is that both sides are fighting a zero-sum game. The Russians, they have the potential to see this thing through. The Russian, the Russian war machine is not to be underestimated. They're there for the long haul. I mean, they may have thought it was going to be a quick in and out in the beginning, but now that they've realized that this operation is for the long haul, they have the capacity to do that. Their country is big enough. They have the manpower. Question is whether they have the will. That's the only thing that people don't really know.
Right, unpacking the latest on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Adil Bradlow coming to us from Berlin in Germany. Appreciate your time this afternoon.